All right, welcome everybody. Yes, happy Tuesday. So we are now on day 3 of our data center week of action, and it was really wonderful to see so many people out at the Texas Capitol yesterday, both at the protest on the front steps and also in testifying to the Senate Committee on Finance yesterday. And it was great that so many people did get to speak against those incentives, tax incentives for data centers. Today, we are going to be hearing from a couple of our experts on some of the land, water, noise, and other kind of issues around data centers, get a brief overview there. And then we will shift over to our skills training with Camille and Julie, and they'll talk about some organizing and social media skills. So we're going to do the kind of quick and dirty version of both of these. But hopefully it will give all of you some good pieces of information to take forward into your campaigns, because that's really what we're trying to do with this week of action, is support all of your local work throughout the state. So I encourage you to reach out to our panelists afterwards. If you have additional questions, we're all here to support your work. And so we will start with Tom Ensminger. Sorry if I got that wrong, who is the policy director for the Texas Coast and Water Program at the National Wildlife Federation. And he'll kick off a presentation that will just, I think, then flow right into Rachel Haynes with the Greater Edward Aquifer Alliance, where she is the policy director. So I will not interrupt your flow with another introduction. I'll let y'all just kick it off. And Rachel, you're welcome to share your screen.
Yes, I do need permission to share. I'm so sorry.
I think you have it now. I just clicked the button.
Okay, perfect.
All right. Thank you, Kaiba, for the intro. And it's a pleasure to be with the group this evening. As Kaiba talked about, we're going to kind of go through some information related to the resource usage concerns related to data centers, specifically water, noise, and land impacts. Next slide, please. So both Rachel and I work for organizations that have, within the past several months, released some studies on these topics and some policy recommendations as they relate to data centers. The idea here is not to provide a set of conditions under which, a thumbs down becomes a thumbs up for any data center in particular or for the issue in general. The idea is just to provide some fodder and some content for some really productive and effective policy conversations and the development of policy that is responsive both to the needs of local governments who find themselves negotiating at the negotiating table with data center developers, but also the public, the conversation that we've heard at the public level over the past several months. I mentioned that I work for, or Kaiba mentioned that I work for the National Wildlife Federation. We work in a coalition called Texas Living Waters with several other conservation organizations. And we developed our document in collaboration with the Houston Advanced Research Center. I want to give them all the kudos that I possibly can for the work that they've done on this area. And then the Greater Edwards Aquifer Alliance, through Rachel, has done a really great deep dive on this issue, the state of play, and they've also come up with some policy recommendations in their document as well. There will be QR codes at the end of the presentation so that you can download these. And we'll get off to the races. Next slide, please. All right, so if you didn't already know this, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it shouldn't be a surprise to any of y'all that Texas is a water-constrained state, and there are water-related issues in Texas. And namely, the large-scale issue here is that we don't have an infinite amount of water, but we have a growing population, and we have several important use sectors for water, things like power generation and municipal use, the drinking water that comes out of our taps every day. Also, farmers and agricultural producers. And there's also industry and private companies that use water as well. The 2027 State Water Plan is under the final stages of development right now. For those of you who haven't seen the draft, it does show a 5.8 million acre foot shortage by 2080. We are very fortunate to live in a state that does comprehensive statewide water supply planning. We've been doing it since 1957, and there's a lot of reasons to support it. but it is showing a shortfall over the next 50 years right now. We know that the cost of the strategies that are in the plan in terms of, building out everything that we know that we can, but over that next 50 years, and that'll help fill the gaps to the extent possible, it would cost $174 billion. And so there's quite a price tag attached to the water plan if the strategies that it recommends are built out. There are shortfalls, however, in the planning effort. It's based on what's called the drought of record, which in many places in Texas is still the 1957 drought. In other parts of Texas, worse droughts have occurred more recently. And it's also based on past usage data. So there's a 5-year planning cycle with the development of the state water plan. 5 years is a pretty quick turnaround time for a comprehensive statewide water plan, but it's a long time in terms of the technological development that we've seen in the data center industry. And so this 2027 water plan and the water shortfall that I'm describing here is not with data about data centers and their water use built in. This is the context for the discussion that we're entering into with data centers. Next slide, please. So just a high-level description of some of the issues here related to data centers. We need to think about, when we think about the water use at a data center, both direct and indirect use. Direct use is the kind of water that we think of being used for cooling. And there are a range of technologies that might be in use at any given data center for cooling. But generally, that's going to range only about 17 to 25% of the overall water use. On the other hand, there's the indirect water use, which is often associated with power generation. And that's where the bulk of it actually comes from. And I should mention, by the way, that both the Greater Edwards Aquifer document and the Texas Living Waters document, we're talking about data centers. We're having this conversation within the context of the data center debate. But a lot of this thinking and this information applies to other kinds of facilities. Think about your chip manufacturers, your cryptocurrency mining operations, and other sort of emerging technologies that have sort of exploded onto the scene over the past several years. In addition to the considerations of both indirect and direct water use, there's also an important water and energy nexus to think about here. And just to kind of keep it simple, the most water efficient solutions that are out there, and there are a lot of different technologies and options that data center designers can pick from, the most efficient water solutions tend to use a little bit more electricity, and then vice versa. If you think about like an evaporative cooler that blows air over water to cause evaporation, that's using a lot of water through evaporation, but moving the air is essentially just blowing a fan, which is not all that power intensive. However, if you're liquid cooling, you have liquid that is pumping through a system instead of air. Moving that liquid requires more power than if it was just light air that you were pushing around. You're not talking about a fan, you're talking about a pump capable of pushing this heavy liquid. However, you don't use as much of it because it is contained within the system and only flushed out on a more rare basis. It's not a straw that's sucking up a water source on a constant basis. With the fact that the majority of the water use is associated with power generation, there's also really important considerations to be made here in terms of how the power is generated. Are we looking at expansion of fossil fuel energy generation or renewables that are more water neutral? Next slide, please. So kind of a little bit more detail on these concerns. When we look at the water and the wastewater side of this, we know that there's a concern out there about the amount of water that data centers use, but it's also really important to consider the type of water that they're using and the source that they're pulling from. The municipal water that we turn on our taps and we receive in our households has been treated to a certain potable standard pursuant to federal law. And public water utilities are required to treat water to this standard. When something in that treatment system fails, you get what's called a boil water notice, which has been a topic for other conversations that y'all might have been involved in. You might have seen them in your own communities. When a data center uses potable water supply for needs that aren't necessarily potable, for example, in a cooling system, nobody's drinking that water. But if it's coming from a potable water system, that means that system had to have capacity added to it to provide that water. And there's a cost to the ratepayer for that. So there would be a concern for a data center using a large amount of municipal potable water. The same is true for permitted water that comes from a groundwater under the control or under the purview of a groundwater conservation district. whose ostensible purpose is to manage the sustainable pumping of water from that groundwater resource. Groundwater conservation districts don't exist everywhere in the state, and so there are non-permitted groundwater sources out there. There's also a wide variation in the amount of resources, both technical and financial, and authoritative, that groundwater conservation districts have in terms of understanding how much really is sustainable use of their groundwater resource, but also the authority to really curtail usage effectively. Once water gets used in a data center, whether it's through cooling or power generation, you think about that closed loop cooling system that has the liquid that it's moving around for cooling purposes. When it is discharged, it becomes wastewater. And different sets of state rules apply to wastewater as opposed to the potable drinking water. We don't have very clear, tailored wastewater discharge requirements for the water that comes out of data centers. You may have seen headlines over the past couple of months about things like bacterial outbreaks in the water that comes from data centers due to changes in things like pH, hardness, temperature, and things like that. We also need to be cognizant that the actual operation of a facility is not the only time that it's using water. The construction of a large facility does also use a considerable amount of water and energy too, for that matter. And so when we think about regulations and policy decisions that are responsive to how much water is used and the way it's used, we need to think about not only wastewater, but the construction phase in addition to operation. There are transparency issues related to this that hinder our ability to plan effectively as a state. I mentioned that the state water plan does not really have water center data use appropriately baked in this new 2027 state water plan that's under finalization right now. There are shortfalls in the planning process. I mentioned it's looking at historical use, reporting over the past 5 years, and it's solving for what we call the drought of record. It's not necessarily looking ahead to think about things like climate variability and rapidly emerging technologies and proposed facilities that aren't necessarily even online yet. There's also not a lot of cooperation that's being seen among state agencies that are trying to gather information in order to fill gaps and make better decisions. The Water Development Board, as part of the development of the state water plan, sent out a survey to data centers above a certain threshold, those understood to be using a certain threshold of water, which I believe is 10 million gallons a year. It was over 300 that they surveyed and only got a 17% response rate. There was a House Natural Resources hearing on June 23rd where this was discovered discussed at some length by the state agency representatives at the committee hearing. The Public Utility Commission had been tasked by the legislature in the 2025 legislative session to conduct a survey. And they got only 28 responses from 92 companies surveyed. And so there is definitely a desire, I think, at the legislative and at the public level to do something to increase these response rates. There's not a lot of firm requirements in statute for this reporting. And where there's not much enforcement. I think on the Water Development Board survey, it's a Class C misdemeanor for not responding, but it's not even clear who's playing cop in this situation. And so there's a lack of clarity that would be helpful to improve transparency here. And then there are local control challenges. I mentioned, for example, the limitations that some groundwater conservation districts face and local governments in those areas where groundwater conservation districts don't exist. Slide, please. So I mentioned that both Rachel and I have policy recommendations in our documents, in our write-ups, and they're very, very succinctly kind of summarized here, but you can go to the documents to get a little bit more explanation on each of these. Starting with that transparency issue, we think that the low-hanging fruit here is to put some firm requirements on the reporting of water and power uses and sources, the cooling technology being employed, the peak consumption, right? Because it's one thing to talk about how much water you consume in a year. It's another thing to say, what's a busy day look like and how much demand are you placing on a system in a given day? And also to limit the scope and applicability of non-disclosure agreements. I think we've heard kind of the scary stories about local officials being faced with non-disclosure agreements because of the proprietary information associated with a given data center proposal. We'd like to see that the limits on the applicability of NDAs as they pertain to public resources like water and energy. We'd like to see requirements around water and power efficiency. Technology moves more quickly than policy, and so I think it would be rather than seeing policy specify a certain type of technology or a certain numerical efficiency threshold, it would be nice just to see every new data center facility required to be more efficient than the state of the industry at that time. We'd like to see them also required to use non-potable water sources. So things like non-potable reuse, all the way down to things like catching rainwater. We'd also like to see under that topic a strengthening of statewide water and power efficiency standards, and along with that, modernization of statewide building codes, which would give us some protection here and ensure some efficiency is being applied, particularly in new development. We'd like to see groundwater protections through technical and financial resources that sort of level the playing field for groundwater conservation districts and local governments. If the developers of data centers had to provide proof that they had done the legwork to show that there is a sustainable source, particularly of groundwater, if that's what they're proposing to take from, if they have to show this in order to get permission to build, that would be an improvement. We'd like to also see support for local utilities who want to add some granularity into their rate structures to make sure that data centers are paying their fair share when it comes to water and power rates. There is a process that needs to be gone through to develop a new rate class, and it involves a study that is taken to the Public Utility Commission and reviewed. It takes up, time, and time is money for a lot of these organizations. And so we think there's room here for the state to do a statewide study that helps provide some guidance to local governments so that they can develop the rate classes that they need. And then wastewater standards, we'd like to see the wastewater coming out of these facilities meeting drinking water standards or recycled wastewater standards. And the water could be recycled on site. This is perfectly achievable. It's just something that the designers of these facilities just need to be asked to do proactively. I know that's a lot, but again, you can get a lot of the more detail on these recommendations by looking at the documents, and there will be QR codes at the end of the presentation. I think at this point, we're shifting out of the water sector into noise and land, so I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Like Tom said, many of these recommendations and more context for all of that, especially the water, can be found in both reports. And I'll make sure to have that screen up while we're answering questions. So I also want to cover some of the noise-related challenges that we're seeing when we talk with communities who are dealing with data centers. And then I will talk a little bit about some land use-related challenges. So I think a lot of us have probably seen articles and reports about some of the challenges and concerns communities have when it comes to the noise emitted by data centers. And again, like Tom said at the beginning of the water-related challenges, these can apply equally to hyperscale data centers, cryptocurrency mines, maybe even more to cryptocurrency mines, semiconductor chip manufacturing, all sorts. They all come with chillers, cooling towers, HVAC systems, server fans, and these combined can all emit constant low-frequency noise pollution, especially when the center has declined to appropriately mitigate noise pollution. And chronic noise pollution can be linked to a whole host of human health concerns, including sleep disturbances, elevated stress, cardiovascular risk. And there is increasing reporting too that it might also be linked to some livestock concerns. So that's something that communities are beginning to monitor. And I think it's important to note that the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, their maximum safe decibel level that they recommend for constant exposure is 70 decibels. They, however, recommend that constant exposure comes at 55 decibels. The World Health Organization comes in much lower. They recommend constant exposure at 30 decibels. And we're seeing that a lot of the data centers and cryptocurrency mines and the like in Texas are potentially even exceeding 80 decibels at time for constant exposure. So it really is a problem, especially for those residences that are really nearby the data centers. Our recommendation is to ask TCEQ, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, to consider noise pollution in its permit applications. At the time, it currently does not do this. Noise pollution is not considered in these type of development permit applications. And we'd also like the state to grant counties the authority to regulate noise pollution. Counties at the moment do not have any authority to regulate noise pollution from sites in the same way that a city might. There's no county noise ordinances that can be enforced. And so we'd like to see the counties granted that authority, and then the authority to implement buffer zones. Buffer zones are a really good way to limit noise pollution and chronic noise exposure for nearby communities. And again, counties don't have the authority at the moment to implement those type of best management practices. And so that's something we recommend. Similarly, the sites come with other concerns. Data center sites, along with those other emerging industry sites, are really large warehouse style buildings. Their land is majority impervious surfaces, and those are, the buildings, the large flat rooftops, all the roads and parking lots that come with those. All of those prevent water from being able to soak into the ground on site or make it follow the normal watershed patterns that it would have before the site was constructed. And this can contribute to downstream flooding and negative water quality impacts, especially if that stormwater is picking up any of the pollutants like, gasoline that can come from cars or leaked oil or just anything that can be collected on impervious surfaces like roads and parking lots and carry that into the nearest water body. We're starting to see some of these impacts especially here in San Antonio and in Medina County next door. We're starting to see some of the impervious surface and stormwater impacts. So it's an issue that communities are facing. To help with this, we recommend the state look into assessing a fee on these data centers that is dedicated to the Flood Infrastructure Fund to help mitigate stormwater impacts, requiring capture and reuse of the stormwater on site and implementation of nature-based stormwater solutions and low-impact development on site would be probably the best first step, implementing those types of best management practices to keep and retain that stormwater on site and hopefully reuse it. And then once again, grant counties more authority. Counties do not have the ability to assess drainage fees and use those drainage fees to implement stormwater measures. They cannot regulate impervious cover, and they can't regulate land use for flood management or flood infrastructure. So asking for those fixes at the county level would help solve some of these issues. And then those same servers and infrastructure and computing equipment and fans and HVAC and all of those things that are contributing to the noise pollution are also often creating a heat island effect for the facility and the surrounding area. There's been some emerging research that shows that these hyperscale data centers can create a heat island effect between 3 and 6 miles away from their center. They can increase nearby land temperatures on average around 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit and occasionally all the way up to 16 degrees if they are not implemented appropriately and don't have the best practices and technology on site. So here we would recommend either the state require or grant the counties the authority to do this, or have cities require green belts, parks, or open space buffers around data centers to help mitigate some of that heat. We'd also like to see data centers themselves use the best available cooling and heat mitigation technologies and reuse that waste heat on site. There's some really good examples in Europe of data centers being able to capture and reuse that waste heat for other industrial purposes and basically lease out their waste heat to other factories and industrial sites. And then once again, like normal, it's going to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but granting counties the authority to regulate incompatible land use and implement buffer zones. Counties at the moment do not have the ability to keep large industrial sites from locating next to residences or schools or hospitals or anything like that. And so, of course, you can imagine when you have that heat island effect, which can have some health concerns associated with it, you need to be able to at least regulate where in the county they are and what sensitive sites they're located next to. And then there's not a ton of research on this yet, just because we're still in the phase of determining how many data centers will actually emerge in Texas, how many of them are real, how many of them are speculative, what will actually get built is still to be determined. But we do know that there will be some loss of agricultural or open space as these centers begin to construct and develop. And again, for that, the best recommendation we have is to to grant counties the authority to regulate incompatible land use and implement those buffer zones. So I know it's over and over the same recommendation, but it really would be very instrumental towards all sorts of the land use impacts we're seeing. That's a lot in a short amount of time, but I wanted to make sure we could leave time for questions. So I will leave this here with our emails. I'm sure Tom would agree. You're welcome to reach out to us at any time. And then if you want to download the reports for further context and further recommendations, they are here.
Thank you very much, Tom and Rachel. Excellent presentation. And I do encourage folks to scan those codes and write down those email addresses because I don't know if we'll get to all the questions, but let's start with a few of them. First, Julie was asking, do you look at the amount of water used during construction of the data centers? How can that be tracked?
So we haven't done research on this construction use of water in particular. There is water used in construction, but it's not the kind of thing I think that we can collect data on in the same way that we collect consumption through a utility for, the ongoing use for planning purposes. I guess what I'm picturing there is more of, just kind of general requirements for the reasonable and I guess considerate use of water during the construction phase, as opposed to a big data collection effort on that side.
Thank you. Another water question. They are self-reporting. This is from Carol. They are self-reporting. So how can we be assured they are not fudging their numbers?
I think double checking information with the utilities that provide the actual resource itself through a meter is helpful. And so we're looking at both the power and the water utilities and having them be a big part of the actual, the reporting and also the verification of this information. I saw Rachel come off mute briefly too.
Oh, yes, I was going to say that, and I was going to say, it's going to be imperative upon the state to audit these surveys. I think right now there's reporting out after the Senate Finance Committee hearing yesterday that the state's really behind on auditing for the tax exemption reporting on jobs and square footage and things like that. So the state is going to, on all of these things, the state is really going to have to ramp up its auditing efforts on these types of disclosures.
All right, I'm going to do one more water and then we'll switch to other issues. Do you think, and this is from Rita, do you think data centers, especially hyperscalers, should have wastewater treatment facilities to ensure that municipalities aren't overwhelmed with concentrated blowdown from these facilities?
I think it's a great option. And I think that when we say wastewater treatment, we don't have to picture in our minds the scale or the degree of treatment that is done for like municipal use for drinking water. I mean, that is one option. Depending on where and how it's discharged. But there is also, separate reuse standards, depending on if it's which water body the water might want to be discharged into. It doesn't have to necessarily be potable. And so I think that, it doesn't have to be something that's at the scale or the cost is what I'm getting at, that public infrastructure sometimes is. It doesn't have to be a huge ask of the facility to treat its own wastewater to a cleaner standard.
All right, so I see Julie, we have a couple questions on noise. One from Julie is, what can be done to lower the noise if a data center is already built?
Yeah, that's a great question. One is to go to the company and let them know. I've seen some communities where they've put up in the fence line around, they put up I don't know what noise meters, lack of a better term, to be able to track and demonstrate how loud the noise actually is at the fence line. And so, of course, approaching the company itself, the facility itself, to see if they would be willing to put in their own measures to buffer that noise is probably the easiest first step in terms of quickness. If you're within a municipality, that you can go to the city offices and the zoning commission or development commission, planning commission, whoever's in charge of enforcing code enforcement, and issue a code enforcement complaint. Unfortunately, in the counties, there's really not much that can be done. That would come with the county trying to work during just basically asking, unfortunately, the company to implement noise reduction technologies or better sound mitigation. And so that's why we're asking for more county authority, because a lot of these are being built in areas where there is nothing that can be done if the company says they don't want to do it. But on the grander scale, requiring buffers, requiring vegetation, requiring there's better ways that they can implement the technology in order to reduce the noise.
There was also a question that related back to something the Trump administration might have done. It says, Carol said, ask how has that decimal level changed with the lowering of regulations from the Trump administration? Do y'all know about
You
that?
know, that is a good question. I don't think I've seen that they've limited, and it's my best understanding is that the EPA is a recommendation for safe exposure. It's not a requirement for safe exposure. So even if the EPA has since lowered the recommendation, it doesn't change much on the ground at the moment. It for anything to be done, it really needs to be a requirement. So that's why cities are able to do things and implement noise ordinances at a certain decibel level that other parts of the state are not. So, but it's a good question. I'll have to go back and look and see if they've done anything on that. So I don't have more.
All right, we're gonna do one more question here, then we'll do our next section. And if we end up with extra time, we can come back to some of the unanswered questions. If not, y'all can email them in. Marie asked, how far does sound travel? It is my understanding that there are no buffer zones, easements required of these data centers. How can we request for them to do so?
I don't know about the first part of the question in terms of how far the data center sound travels. That's really going to be site dependent, I think. But it depends on being able to ask them to do so. It depends on where you are. If you are located within a city and the data center site is within city boundaries, they are bound to whatever the local municipalities noise ordinances. They have to meet that. If they are located in an unincorporated county, there's not a noise ordinance they are bound to. But if they are not constructed yet and they are in the development phase, unfortunately, the only tool that counties have is a development agreement, a tax abatement agreement. But in that agreement, the county can ask them to put in noise limits and buffers. So it's less of a ordinance and more of a development agreement process, but it is something to ask your local county officials to do when they are dealing with these data center companies. And so that's again why we want it to come from the state, because it does need to be a tool that they are granted that doesn't rely on tax abatements to do so.
All right, and then just to round it out, we have some folks asking for your slides. Are you willing to share your slides later with the attendees?
Slides and emails, absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. All right, if you'll want to stop sharing and we'll switch it over. Camille Cook, who is the Climate and Clean Energy Associate with us at Public Citizens Texas office, is going to give us an overview of some key things to think about when organizing, and in particular when organizing using social media. And then we'll get some additional training from Julie Waters after Camille's presentation.
Thank you for the intro, Kaiba. Can you see my screen? Can folks see it? Cool. Okay, great. Well, yeah, it's good to see all y'all virtually. For those whom I haven't met, my name is Camille Cook. I work at Public Citizen. This presentation is going to be geared towards folks who have site fights in their locales. So if it's not exactly, that's not exactly what you're doing, I hope this is still helpful for folks, but that's kind of just the overarching thing for this. So welcome. This is an expedited or a quick, organizing 101 with social media narrative and outreach. So here we go. The goals of this are to understand the importance of narrative for building power in relationships and to understand how to use social media to get out that narrative. So what is the importance of narrative, right? We know in this fight that our opponents, data center developers, big tech, they have money and they have access, right? And so one of the most fundamental things about narrative and social media is countering that ability to distribute their narrative with our narrative. Another important thing about the narrative is it builds trust in our community. If our community sees, that we're showing up for them, that we're talking to them face to face through Instagram or Facebook or something, it builds trust. And that trust is what you need to win in your community, right? It strengthens our messaging. And so one, kind of often one of the most important like organized ways that social media can be an organizing tool for people is that it strengthens your ability to say your message. You get better at it by all of the captions you have to write on Instagram, all the graphics you have to put onto social media, all of the reels you have to make, videos of yourself talking. That strengthens your ability to communicate your message. And lastly, people want to hear our stories. Like there's over 50 people here, people want to hear the underdog story of us, winning over a multi-billion dollar corporation and getting power to our community. So these are like some of the important parts of a narrative. Social media. So the importance of social media for that narrative is that it refines your message, it helps with recruiting, and it popularizes your message. What I mean by refining your message is that, over time, you really get to able to say your message in 3 sentences, right? Like what we're doing, why we're doing it, how you can help. It helps with recruiting and bringing new people into the organization, bringing new people into the fight. And lastly, it also popularizes your message. It gets people talking about it. And I would argue that it's one of the most important things that your organization can do. I think the most important thing is have a cohesive, like sound, straight to the point message. What is the political line you're pushing? What is the thing that you're trying to do? Saving your community's water, fighting back against an unfair system. Uh, if you have that, the best thing that can help you is social media. With that, I'm going to go into some steps about how to actually make the social media work, right? Number one is I think it's important to find out where your base is. Base being like who is the community, who is your community, who are the people you're reaching out to? And the first question for this is what do people in your community use? Do they use Facebook? Do they use Instagram? Do they use TikTok? Older folks, they tend to use Facebook. Younger people use Instagram and TikTok, right? Think about who are the people you're trying to reach out to. Another question is where do folks message each other? Do they message over WhatsApp? Do they primarily message in Facebook groups? Do they message over email? Do they have group chats, neighborhood group chats? These are the things that are good to think about when you're thinking about where do I want to put the message, like, my message, my social media stuff. I think an extra thing that's also important that you'll get over time by doing this is thinking about the characteristics of your base. What is the general age of my base? What sectors of society do they occupy? Are these working class folks? Are these rural folks? Are these people who are, whose jobs are being lost because of AI? Economy of the locale. How strong is the economy? What kind of people, what kind of motivating things will bring people out? And also, where do folks congregate? Do they congregate at church? Do they congregate at certain like restaurants in town? These are all questions that can kind of help you, one, like solidify who is your base, but also how can you best reach them, right? Because you don't want, if your people are mostly retired people, you don't want to be posting things on TikTok, right? Or like Instagram, really. Like, well, maybe you do if that's what's with your community, but a lot of people are on Facebook, right? And a lot of people are maybe not even on internet. So you got to think about, or like not super on social media. So you got to think about your message in that way. So that is the first thing I'd say is analyze your base. The next thing, I'm going fast. But leaves more time for questions. The next thing is you want to align on your message. No matter what your post is, you want to make sure you're on message. You do like it's always important. It's the most important thing is to always have a clear ask or a clear political line. Being that you don't want to confuse people with your messaging. That doesn't mean that every single post needs to be you need to go do this or you need to go do that. It can very much be like, this is what our organization thinks about this news development or this other thing. It doesn't have to be like, you need to come to city council, you need to come to your county commissioners tomorrow. It can just be like a place where how I like to think about it is like you want your social media page to be what everyone in your town goes to when they think about data centers. You want to be the point of reference. And so it's so important to align your message and keep it tight. You do not want to confuse people. You don't want to say like, yes, if we just fight our county commissioners, we're gonna win it. But then the next post you say, come to our like one-on-one meeting with our county commissioners to think through this. Of course, over these over these fights in different locales as they continue on, you're gonna like have changes in opinion or changes in like strategy and tactics. That's fine, but just try over your posts to keep people along the same message because you don't want to confuse them with different things because that's like the number one way that people lose interest is that they're confused. You want to make the whole point of all of the social media work is to make your message as clear as possible. You want to deliver on a silver platter to your people, right? That's why you want to think about where do they congregate? Where do they, what social media do they use? What arguments are agitational to them, right? So after you've aligned on your message, you've thought about your base, the characteristics of your base, you go to step three, it's post. You know, I've separated this slide into two separate things, reels and graphics, reels being videos, right? For reels, you want to get the message out at the beginning of the video. People do not watch full videos. I can speak for myself. I'm not gonna speak for y'all, but if I'm scrolling through Instagram or something, I'm only gonna watch the first like 10 seconds for most things, right? If even that, like the first 5 seconds of most videos. If you're posting a reel on social media, you want to get the first thing, you want to get the most important thing out first, in case people stop paying attention, after 5 seconds. The next thing is graphics. You want to keep the language concise. You don't want more than a few sentences in a post if you can make it. If you need more than that, have multiple slides in one post or have multiple posts. You want to put the majority of the language in the caption. Again, people don't always be reading the captions either, but you have more room to like have more sentences there. And lastly, for graphics, less is more. The negative space is just as important as the positive space. I have an example post from the Data Center Rebellion of here. Like, I'll put it out there. I made it myself. I think it's fine. It's not my best work. I think it's whatever, but I think like this is an example of a post that is closer to the ideal, what you want. You don't have a bunch of words. You have one sentence and then a where, when, what. And you have in big letters the most important thing, take action against data centers, right? You want that, whatever your final action to be, you want that to be the biggest thing. And you want to also have your logo, that Texas Data Center Rebellion logo. You want to have your logo on all your things so people continuously associate data centers with whatever your particular group is, right? So let's go into some best practices. I'm going to go a little bit deeper into Reels. CapCut is a good editing program. There are different editing programs for doing videos. CapCut is a good combination of providing depth as well as ease of use. So there are different programs that you can do more complicated things with, but CapCut will get 99% of what you need on CapCut. That's pretty easy. For Reels, getting more specific, you always need to have captions, like right here. This is Carrie from Taylor talking about how we need people to create human and land-centered zoning so that we can thrive. People don't always have sound on. You want to have captions. You want to usually have 2 lines. I made this, I did 4. Do not follow that. You usually want to have 2 lines. Size 14 font, and it's not covered by the caption. So you see down here, the caption is there and it doesn't cover that. So if people are scrolling through, people can see what the person is saying, even if they're not like watching the video or listening to the video. Again, and also you want to have a title up top saying, your big main idea of the post. What do Texans need in the fight against data centers? You're hearing from community members saying that. Very quickly, that is like those are some tips for Reels. For graphics, a couple of things that are helpful is you want to use trending audio. That helps with the algorithm, especially on Instagram. You want to check the analytics. This is the analytics from the Texas Data Center Rebellion post. This shows when our followers are most active, meaning when are we going to get the most likes, comments, shares are in these times, and you want that because the more of that you get, the more the algorithm will push your message out, you want that. Another very, very important thing is you want to be always uplifting and agitational. And I don't mean agitational like, like your sibling is agitating you or something like that, but it means like you want people to feel something, right? You want to agitate people to take action, right? And so you always want your messaging to be uplifting and your language to be uplifting and agitational. You don't want to say like there's a bad vote at a county commissioner's meeting. This has happened to all of us. It will continue to happen. You don't want to say, guys, this is a bad vote, and this is tough. Like this is we're in a bad place right now. You can say that you can. I think a way you can change that and make it more uplifting is not lie to the base. Is not say this was a great vote and we're chugging along. But you can say this is a tough vote, but we showed up in our numbers and we're going to continue to show up. And we know that when we continue to show up, we're going to win next time. You know, these are the kind of ways that you want to think about the messaging for your posts. When it comes to designing graphics, Canva is the standard for graphics, like CapCut. You know, it is a good combination of easy to use, intuitive, and will get you the things you need to get fast enough. So I would recommend Canva if you want to make a graphic. And then also have a clean logo. It's really important to have just a clean logo you can slap on every page, slap it anywhere, so people again can continue to associate yourself. Almost done. I think I'm almost at time. A couple more best practices are you want to have a basic website with forms and use the link in bio to send people there. So it's great to have a basic website that has all the forms that, you know, if you want to send something to a county commission or something, you can direct them to your bio and all that they'll need is right there. Play around. I would say play around with satirical posts, but be careful. You don't always want to. Am I getting close, Kaiba? All right, I'm almost done. Play around with satirical posts, but be careful. You know, you don't want to make light of some of these very serious things that people are dealing with. I mean, this is people's livelihoods, communities' livelihoods, but satirical posts can be agitational for folks, you know, if done well. Again, put your logo everywhere and spend a lot of time making sure it looks good. And don't be afraid to send collab requests to other accounts. This furthers your reach. And you want to borrow. You know, this take it from other people. Lots of people are doing this work, and you want to check out. Here is a small example of some pages for inspiration on language, graphics, types of posts, and feel free to reach out to them too. All of these accounts are putting out great graphics, great reels, great captions. Feel free to borrow them and use them for your own fight. You know, why reinvent the wheel? And then lastly, for recommendations, I would say have a social media team, not just one person, for all the reasons I said earlier. Social media helps develop people. It gives people practice externalizing your messages. Anyone can learn graphic design and video design. I'm one of those people. I'm not good at it, but I have spent a lot of time and I think I've improved a little bit, you know? And it's one of the most important things your organization can get good at. This is going to be the best thing for your organization beyond having a typed message is having good graphics and videos. And lastly, you learn through doing. So don't be afraid to put out some bad things at first because you're going to learn through doing it. And yeah, so good luck. This is my email. Please reach out. I hope that was fast enough, Kaiba, not too fast for everyone else.
No, you're great, Camille. Excellent presentation. Thank you. And we'll do Q&A after Julie speaks. Julie Waters is the leader of Texans United Against Data Centers. And if you've been following her at all, you'll know that she is out there on Facebook doing posts all the time, doing lots of videos and other posts as well. So excited to hear from you, Julie.
Thank you. Thank you. And if you guys want, I had 2 questions for the participants. If you want to list it in the chat, which county you're from, and does your county have a Facebook group? So kind of, I love all the tips and advice that Camille offered. And so what I am going to share is what I tell other counties to do when they ask for help. Like how do we get organized and what do we do? And so what I have seen in working with many different counties, looking at what they're doing, studying them, the ones that have been the most effective, the ones that have been able to fight off data centers, either the data centers have left or they are holding them off. Those are the ones that can pull together a group of people. And so what I'm going to share today is how you can use social media to do that. Okay, so first of all, if your county or your organization, your group, no, if your county does not have a Facebook group, you need to create one. And it needs to be something very easy to find. I would make it a public group. So for example, we'll go with Childress County because that was one of the latest ones. So I think theirs is say no to data. No, it starts with Childress, like Childress County says no to data centers, something like that. So you want a name that reflects your county and the words no data centers so that people can find it easily. So once you've started that, then the Facebook algorithm will kind of help push that out, and you'll start to get people, and you want to post in there the things that Camille was talking about, post about the data centers that's being built there, post about county commissioner meetings, city council meetings. And so if it's a public group, people will start to find it. And also invite your friends. So once you have that, then you need to, on that Facebook group, create a event page and hold a meeting. You need to find other like-minded people. And so primarily because these are happening in rural counties, in small towns, oftentimes it can feel like you're the only one, but you're not. And so in these small rural areas, people are very hesitant to speak out. Even though they don't want the data center, there are a few people in power that do. Maybe it's the mayor, maybe it's a county commissioner, maybe it's the owner of the president of the bank. It's just those few people that are kind of pushing for it. But everybody in the community, it's so small. Maybe there's 700 people, 1,000 people, 3,000 people. You all know each other. You see each other all the time at the grocery store, at church. And so it's very easy or you do business with them. And so it's very easy to not want to say anything. But the Facebook group and holding a meeting, that is how you're going to find your people. You even if you have like 3 or 4, if you can find 3 or 4 like people who are as passionate as who's completely on board. If you can form that small team, then the other people will come too. Okay? So I don't want you to be discouraged if in the beginning it's only you and maybe 2 or 3 other people. Just keep at it. And so you'll use to find those people, then you as a group, you start going to all the county commissioner meetings and you speak at them. That is going to be your very first line of defense. You have to know what is happening. Those meetings happen twice a month. It's usually the second and fourth Mondays of the month, but it varies. It can vary. And so you go to those meetings, you email, you call them. And again, I know that may be uncomfortable because sometimes these county commissioners don't even have emails. But again, you all know each other. But if you want to stop a data center, this is your very first line of defense is the county commissioners and asking them to not give tax abatements. So that is where I recommend that you start and how you use social media to do that. So I am used to, when I speak, I'm used to like more feedback from the audience. So this is a little different, but oh, good. Mary went to our first county commissioner meeting yesterday, and it was a lot. Okay, it was a lot of us. That is key. That is absolutely key. If 5 of you show up, they're going to pass that tax abatement. If the room is full and you guys are standing up and you are speaking, they are much, much, much less hesitant to pass things. So the more you can get people to come, it is so important. It's hard because it's usually on a Monday at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. when people work. But find your retirees, find your stay-at-home moms. Again, social media will be really key in finding these people. So that is generally what I tell people when they are first starting out, and that's how you use social media, is that you find your core team through Facebook. So, questions?
Thank you very much, Julie. And yeah, I'll just say again, I've been really impressed by all the videos that you are posting from your travels around the state. And I think that's been a huge benefit to the movement in general. I am seeing a few folks posting their locations in the chat. And I do see a request for one-on-one training, and I think that we could arrange that. I don't know, Camille, do you have any response there to Carol's questions? She says, she's new to this and might need some one-on-one help.
Yeah, I can put my email, or we can follow up with my email and we can talk.
Yeah, I would say in general, one of the things that, again, that Public Citizen and other organizations that, do have paid staff, we're trying to do is help, upskill for all of y'all who are just doing this as volunteers. So definitely reach out to me, reach out to Camille. We will help you however we can. And if that means just hopping on a Teams meeting or whatever to kind of go over how to use some of these, we can do that. I see somebody asking specifically about a meeting in Bastrop County to educate people on data centers, and would any of you be willing to come and speak to them? Yes, I think that probably is, for those of us who live in Travis County, Bastrop County is right next door. Camille, do you have any response there?
Yes, we wanted to go to the one earlier this week, but I got an email saying that there were too many people who had signed up, and so they needed people to be virtual. So, sounds like y'all are having good problems in Bastrop, but I'm happy to support, and we're definitely happy to support a Public Citizen with more details, I guess. Just like when is it? I actually don't see where that comment is.
That was in the Q&A. And there was also a suggestion about using Nextdoor. Do either of y'all have experience, Julie or Camille, using Nextdoor to organize?
I don't, but that is exactly knowing your community. If your people are on Nextdoor, get on Nextdoor too.
Oh, and I will say for the rural areas, something that I've learned, especially with the older people, they don't use emails. And so it's phone calls. We do a lot. They are much more comfortable calling or texting, but sometimes they don't use email. So if you're going to post on social media and it's a call to action, include a phone number because you will have a whole host of people that aren't afraid to call.
That's right. That's the old school social media there, picking up the phone and talking to people. That's still a thing, folks.
Oh, and writing letters. We do every time I hold a meeting, I have lots of letters and people, like I have the top part has my main message, and then there's a box at the bottom where people can write their own personal message. And then what I do is, and I bring envelopes and they all address, usually I'll have people write like 7, the governor, representatives, mayors, whoever. 7 different letters. Then I will collect those letters at the end of the meeting. I ask people to bring stamps, and then I will mail them in small batches over the next couple of weeks. So I find that to be, so not one person gets all of the mail in one day and then forgets about it. They're getting a constant barrage of letters, over the next month.
We have one more question here about another application called 5Calls. Do either of you know anything about that one? I haven't heard of it.
I have. I've heard that is very good. The people that have used it have really loved it, and I need to look more into it, but I've heard good things about it.
All right, sounds like that's one that we can try to add to our repertoire as well. All right, well, thank you very much to all of our panelists. I am seeing lots of requests for the recording and slides, so we will definitely follow up with those. We will also be emailing out information tomorrow about our next webinar. So definitely we do encourage you. I know that there were some questions about other topics. We, haven't scheduled webinars on every single topic necessarily, but we tried to hit on a lot of things. I'm putting the link to the Data Center Week of Action in the chat, and you'll see there we do have 2 additional webinars coming up, so please do register for those and share that around with your contacts. And as there are other topics of interest that we're not able to cover in these next couple webinars, we can schedule more in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you all, and let's keep fighting together to make things better for Texas in the face of this onslaught of data centers.